The man accused of being a drug mule for music mogul Sean Diddy Combs is no longer facing any charges after he was arrested for narcotics possession. And this comes as the lawsuit he's mentioned in gets some major updates. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Brendan Paul, we haven't talked about him in a while. This is the man who's accused in a lawsuit of being a sort of drug concierge for rapper and music executive Sean Diddy Combs. Well, turns out he will not face any jail time for allegedly being caught at a Florida airport with cocaine. No, you see, I should tell you though, he is also wrapped up in a bombshell civil lawsuit against Sean Combs. That hasn't gone away. And this is a lawsuit that accuses multiple people of trafficking, drugs, and sex workers. But right now, talking about Sean Combs, he is in a Brooklyn detention center after a grand jury for the Southern District of New York indicted him on charges of racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. He's been denied bail multiple times. He will be staying in that detention center, by all accounts, sitting there for the holidays and New Year's. His trial is currently scheduled for May of 2025. But now let's talk about Brendan Paul. So we first learned about him in a lawsuit that was filed on behalf of Rodney Little Rod Jones. This is a music producer who says he basically lived with Sean Combs for a year while the two had worked on his latest album together. Now, Jones says that he also spent a lot of time with Brendan Paul, who he basically accused of being, as I said, a drug mule. And this lawsuit, aside from the multi-million-dollar civil lawsuit that was filed by Sean Combs' ex-girlfriend Cassandra Ventura, this was one of the first big red flags that indicated something big was on the horizon, because it included all sorts of allegations of illegal activity on a much grander scale. The lengths that Sean Combs and his staff allegedly went to in order to fulfill the record label CEO's desires. I mean, Rodney Jones brought up allegations about racketeering, this racketeering criminal enterprise. But back to Brendan Paul. Who is he? Well, he's apparently this Ohio native. He was a star basketball player at Syracuse and Fairmont State Universities. This is before he actually got involved in music production during the pandemic. But I will tell you, it's unclear how exactly he got linked up with Sean Combs, or maybe got linked up with him. I'll say he has been named, and photos of him have been included in Rodney Jones' lawsuit. Now, he's accused of carrying all sorts of drugs with him at all times for Sean Combs, and is also accused, by the way, of being involved in paying sex workers. Jones filed his lawsuit in February, and then he filed an amended complaint offering more details in March. And by the way, March was an important month in this case because that is when Combs' two mansions, one in Miami, the other in Los Angeles, were raided by federal authorities. Homeland Security investigators were seen at the properties carrying boxes of evidence out of those homes. Combs was not at either house during the raids, and there was concern at one point that he might have fled the country, but he was spotted later that day in Miami. Now, Combs wasn't arrested at that time. He wasn't charged with anything at that time, but it was clear that federal investigators were looking into his conduct, and there could be very serious legal action on the way. We were all saying for months, is it possible he's going to be indicted, and when would he be indicted? And then, just 2 days later, 2 days after the raids, on March 27th, Brendan Paul was arrested at the Miami Opa-locka Executive Airport. He was allegedly trying to board Sean Combs' private jet. According to an arrest affidavit, authorities caught him with cocaine and marijuana. Now, state attorneys decided to only prosecute Paul for the cocaine possession, and they offered the now 26-year-old the deal. If he completed a drug diversion program, the possession charge would be dropped. It's an option that's often given to first-time offenders. Now, we actually got more information about that earlier this year when we spoke with Melba Pearson, former Miami-Dade County prosecutor. Here's what she had to say.
But since he did not have anything in his past, he didn't have a criminal history, he was offered what was called diversion. And what that does is that it gives you the opportunity for participation in a program for 6 months. If you don't get arrested again, if you complete the program, so it could be drug therapy, it could be counseling, it could be community service, it could be any of a number of things, it just could be a fine. You comply, you do all of that, and then after 6 months, the charges get dropped against you, meaning that you don't have anything on your criminal record in terms of a conviction. The rest will still be on your record. You'll have to disclose that if let's say you do a job application and they ask whether or not you've been arrested, you have to answer yes. But if they ask you if you've been convicted, you can check no, which is, again, a huge thing in terms of collateral consequences and being able to move forward with your life after interaction with the criminal justice system.
Hey, by the way, as you know, we have been trying to cover every aspect of this Diddy story as it develops. And for that, I have to thank our incredible sponsor, Morgan & Morgan, because it's with their support that we're able to produce these episodes. Now, here's the deal about Morgan & Morgan. If you're injured, America's largest injury law firm, maybe who you want in your corner. I mean, Morgan & Morgan has a dedicated team of over 1,000 attorneys. They have case specialists, paralegals, investigators, an incredible track record, by the way. Recent verdicts like $12 million in Florida, $26 million in Philadelphia. These are higher than the highest insurance offers in these cases. There's no upfront fee. The whole process can be done right from your smartphone. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC Sidebar. So now let's fast forward to what happened on Tuesday. This is 9 months after he was arrested. Paul had his final charge dropped. According to court records, he completed the pretrial diversion program that I mentioned, which included a drug substance abuse course. Now, the court website shows that the two original charges, they were felonies. That means potential jail time. Possession of cocaine, possession of a controlled substance, but no action was taken on the controlled substance charge, as I mentioned. And the disposition for the cocaine charge is listed as nolle prosequi. You know what? I haven't said that term since law school. Hopefully I said it correctly. A lot of people just say no pros, but it means that the prosecutor decided not to pursue charges. So the record indicates that Paul successfully finished that pretrial intervention, and that would be the conclusion of his case as of now. But now I want to talk about some of the accusations against Brendan Paul that are laid out in Jones' civil complaint, because here's the truth. We don't know if Brendan Paul will somehow be connected to Sean Combs' criminal case. To be clear, though, when it comes to this, Paul is not named as one of the defendants that Jones is suing, but his alleged boss, Christina, sure is. According to Jones, Paul reported to Coram. This was Combs' alleged chief of staff, and she has been described in this lawsuit as a Ghislaine Maxwell type to Sean Combs. Maxwell, of course, is the woman convicted of trafficking young girls on behalf of her boss or associate or friend or boyfriend, I don't even know what you want to say, Jeffrey Epstein. Now, Coram was reportedly Combs' right-hand woman and had several direct reports, including Brendan Paul. This is according to the lawsuit. So the amended complaint reads, as the chief of staff, defendant Coram was instrumental in organizing and executing the RICO and TVPA enterprises. Now, RICO, of course, stands for Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, basically an allegation that Combs' enterprises, his businesses, really a criminal organization, and that its employees and associates were committing criminal acts in furtherance of that criminal organization. TVPA is the Trafficking Victims Protection Act that was passed in 2000 to combat human trafficking. The suit continues. Defendant Coram had the following individuals execute the following tasks for the RICO and TVPA enterprises. Stevie J recruits sex workers and attends and participates in freak-offs. Justin Combs solicits prostitutes, underage girls, and sex workers, would engage in freak-offs. And Justin Combs is, of course, Diddy's son. He's also named as one of the defendants in this complaint. But it continues, Brendan Paul works as Mr. Combs' mule. He acquires and distributes Mr. Combs' drugs and guns. Frankie Santella works alongside Brendan. While Brendan acquires and distributes Mr. Combs' drugs and guns, Frankie carries the money and pays for the guns and drugs. And a footnote actually indicates that Frankie Santella was vice president of music management and strategic partnerships for Combs Global. But Paul is also named as one of the people who allegedly worked out fees with sex workers and made sure they got paid. And when it came to drugs, the complaint says there was a lot of them. Members of the enterprise and their associates procured, transported, and distributed ecstasy, cocaine, GHB, ketamine, marijuana, mushrooms, and 2C by packing these substances in their carry-on luggage and going through TSA. Now, we have told you before about 2C. It's also known as pink cocaine. It is a party drug that has surged in popularity here in the United States. It's actually not just cocaine, but usually is a mix of different psychoactive drugs. Researchers say, though, its pink color is just for aesthetics, it's just for looks. But going back to the complaint, it continues. Plaintiff Jones personally witnessed members of the enterprise do this during national and international travel as detailed below. Brendan Paul on December 22nd, 2022, from Miami, Florida to St. Bartholomew. Brendan Paul and Christina on April 28th, 2023, from Los Angeles to New York City to Virginia and back to LA. Brendan Paul on November 4th, 2023, from Los Angeles, California to London, England. And then there's this footnote that says that Paul was seen packing cocaine into his carry-on luggage in Combs' garage the evening before that flight to London. The lawsuit also says that Paul was also required to have drugs on him all the time. It says, quote, the following is a screenshot of a video taken on Mr. Combs' yacht on or about December 25th, 2022 at 2:40 a.m. Brendan Paul is videotaped with one of the black pouches defending Combs and Christina required the associates and members of the Combs RICO enterprise to carry. This pouch was filled with ecstasy, cocaine, GHB, ketamine, marijuana, mushrooms, and Tusi. So a lot of serious allegations packed into this lawsuit. But again, Paul is not named as one of the civil defendants, and his drug case in Miami is now basically over. But of course, civil allegations are very different than criminal allegations, but there is an overlap between what prosecutors are alleging and what is being alleged in Jones' lawsuit. And I will say, since prosecutors have alleged that during these freak-off sessions, there has been rampant drug use, and these are those prolonged, coerced sexual performances involving sex workers, you have to wonder whether or not Brendan Paul is somebody prosecutors have spoken to, plan to call as a witness, whether or not his name will even come up during the course of this criminal case. We shall see. But going back to this Jones lawsuit, we actually have an update for you on this. So, a new order came down from the judge overseeing this case and gave a partial win to Jones and also a partial win to the defendants. It's a bit complicated, it's a little complex, but here's the basics. So when Rodney Jones' lawyer, Tyrone Blackburn, filed this original lawsuit in February, he named multiple defendants, including executives with record labels like Universal Music Group and Motown Records. And he alleged that those executives knew what Combs was up to and just let it happen. Well, Blackburn filed paperwork to voluntarily dismiss the defendant, Ethiopia Habtemariam, this is chief executive of Motown, and then later moved to dismiss all the claims against the music executive, saying, based on his examination of all the papers submitted in support of both motions to dismiss, he has concluded that there is no legal basis for the claims and allegations that were made against the UMG defendants. So those record executives wanted Blackburn sanctioned for basically wasting their time, allegedly acting in bad faith. However, U.S. District Judge J. Paul Oetken released an order that explained why he didn't believe Blackburn acted inappropriately, saying he acknowledged his errors once presented with the facts from the defendants. In conclusion, he wrote, for the foregoing reasons, the UMG defendant's motion for sanctions is denied. Plaintiff's motion to voluntarily dismiss all claims in the second amended complaint against Grange, Motown Records, and UMG is granted, and those claims are dismissed with prejudice, meaning they can't be refiled again. And look, I have to say, I'm not necessarily surprised that sanctions weren't granted here. Sanctions, generally speaking, are rare. You are talking about really egregious bad behavior on the part of lawyers. You're talking about filing for an improper purpose, like to harass people, or really frivolous arguments that there's no support in law and fact. It doesn't seem, based on the judge's assessment, that this reached that level. But now I will say, now that these defendants have been dropped from the suit, who remains? Well, the four remaining defendants are Sean Combs, his son Justin Dior Combs, Christina and actor Cuba Gooding Jr., who Jones claims sexually assaulted him on a yacht that Combs had rented. We're going to keep monitoring this case, see where it leads, see if it connects more back to Sean Combs' criminal case. And speaking of that, Sean Combs himself was actually in federal court today in New York for his criminal case. His attorneys, the prosecution, and the judge all got updates on the case's progress. But actually, Law&Crime's Elizabeth Milner was inside the courtroom since there are unfortunately no cameras allowed.
It was a lot of just discovery material, which isn't the most fun topic to really talk about, if we're being honest here a little bit. So a lot of things was just turning over evidence, what time frame that evidence will be turned in. And so from what, So the government says that they're on track to produce the discovery by the end of the year, meaning December 31st. You know, they say the investigation is still ongoing. They said that they pulled all the text messages from Combs as well as victim one in this case. And then they're kind of proceeding as quickly as possible when it comes to that superseding indictment. So the government was trying to make it clear that, you know, they're still in the process of doing the investigation. It still seems like the superseding indictment is still lingering on in the case. But it was also interesting, too, because, you know, we have covered a number of stories about kind of the response from the defense side and kind of talking with the prosecution here. But I noticed whenever I was inside that courtroom that there was a lot of like chumminess going on. There was a lot of laughs, a little bit of giggles coming from Mark Agnifilo talking with the prosecutors right before the hearing had started. So they seemed, you know, you wouldn't think that they're in this kind of, you know, fiery battle or anything about the case. They seem pretty chummy. They seem very cordial. And they both sides seem to have respected each other in terms of turning over that evidence, making sure that every deadline is hit and that type of sort. Now, there was a pending motion that the judge did bring up that, you know, at the time, Judge Submaranian did mention that he wanted to keep, he was possibly thinking about denying that motion, but instead what he did was the prosecution, or excuse me, the defense time, or excuse me, a lot of music kind of going on here in the background. But what the defense says is that their preference was to keep that motion open so that way, you know, the judge wouldn't dismiss it with a little bit of prejudice, which means that they could have refiled the motion. But, you know, that didn't happen. The defense kind of appeared that they just wanted the motion to stay open, see what would happen with all of that. But, you know, it seems like we will not be seeing any bit of Diddy until March when the next hearing is going. But it seems like they're all kind of going along with the timeline. It seems that they appear to be ready to get started on May 5th, pending whatever goes on with the potential superseding indictment, which again, I just want to stress to our viewers that has not been issued at this time. But it seems as though, you know, they're on track for a May 5th trial date. But again, also, you know, with this time frame given, that's 5 months, meaning 5 more months that Diddy is still behind bars until we kind of see how this entire trial plays out. But for the most part, that's what I gathered from this really quick hearing.
As for Sean Combs, as I mentioned, he's scheduled to go to trial next year on May 5th, 2025. And until then, he's going to stay behind bars. Judge Subramanian was the latest judge to deny Combs' request for bail despite offering an enormous $50 million bail package. Prosecution said there's evidence that Combs is trying to influence witnesses from inside the MDC, Metropolitan Detention Center. At the very least, he was breaking the rules. And what I mean by he's breaking the rules, he was involved in jail phone calls, like using other inmates' information to make calls or conducting three-way phone calls. That's a big no-no in the MDC, and the judge was persuaded by the prosecution that Sean Combs should not be entitled to pretrial release. We, of course, though, are going to continue to follow all things Combs closely and bring you all the latest updates right here on Sidebar. That's all we have for you right now, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.